2021 was the year of the unicorn. Every day, another startup reached the milestone of a $1 billion valuation. Now, the first mention of unicorns came in a 2013 TechCrunch article, Welcome to the Unicorn Club, written by Silicon Valley VC Aileen Lee. Lee's Unicorn Club was mythical, aspirational, and rare. It comprised just 39 companies, all of which had been founded in the United States. The Unicorn Club was a quintessentially American phenomenon. Or was it? Now, by the end of 2013, there actually had been a number of unicorns produced outside the United States, but no one was paying attention. In 2017, I appeared on the first episode of the first season of Masters of Scale. The name of the episode was The Next Silicon Valley, and Reid Hoffman posed the question whether a unicorn breeding ground could emerge outside of Silicon Valley in the US. I said yes, everyone else said no, except maybe China. So what would you guess is the percentage of unicorns bred outside the US today? Well, in 2021, China birthed 17% of the world's that class of unicorns, while 32%, a full third, came from the rest of the world. That means just 51% of the 2021 class of unicorns were founded in the US. So what we're going to do now is look at a time lapse of unicorns from 2014 to 2021 to show how the rest of the world is catching up. And hopefully this is going to work, okay? But should we even be talking about unicorns in 2023? Well, here's why it's important. As the rest of the world breeds more and more unicorns, including here in Europe, but also in many of the emerging markets around the world, the global ambitions of those founders are growing, and they're coming after global talent, global market share, and global capital, and still almost no one sees this coming. So what I'm here to do today is talk about how it's possible to breed unicorn breeding ecosystems in places we would never imagine. So as a bit of background, I co-founded Endeavor 25 years ago to support high-growth, high-impact entrepreneurs around the world. Today, Endeavor operates in 41 emerging and underserved markets. And our Endeavor Catalyst Fund has invested in 53 unicorns, the vast majority from the rest of the world, and a number here in Europe. Endeavor Catalyst ranks among the top 5 most prolific investors in unicorns in the rest of the world. Okay, but back in the 1990s, when we were beginning, we were founded in 1997, emerging markets were tech wastelands, unlikely to produce even a single company worth $1 billion. So what happened? Well, first, let's look at the barriers. So entrepreneurs in these markets, in emerging markets, face a number of additional hurdles beyond just the challenges of starting a company. The high cost of failure, the lack of role models, limited access to talent, lack of networks and mentors, the absence of trust, what Phil was just talking about in the last session, and limited access to smart capital. But we believed back 25 years ago that if you could systematically break down some of these barriers, there was tremendous local talent to be unleashed. In 1998, I met a 24-year-old, 7th-generation Patagonian sheep farmer named Wences Casares. Some of you may know him as Bitcoin Patient Zero. Now, back then, Wences was building the E-Trade of Latin America. He called it Patagon.com, and he approached every local investor in Argentina. There were 34, and all 34 turned him down. I don't have the right last name, he told me. 18 months later, Wences sold Patagon to Banco Santander at a $750 million valuation. That's $1.2 billion in today's currency. Suddenly, everyone was saying, hey, if Wences can do it, I can too. And two of the people inspired by his story were Argentine Stanford MBAs, Marcos Galperin and Hernan Cazá. The pair moved back to Buenos Aires to found Mercado Libre, an online marketplace that would rival eBay and later Amazon and Alibaba. In August 2007, Mercado Libre became the first Latin tech company to IPO on the NASDAQ. Inspired by both Patagon and Mercado Libre, 4 corporate employees in Argentina launched Globant, a digitally native software company. In 2014, Globant IPO'd on the New York Stock Exchange. And this is when we had this aha moment. All of these early success stories in Latin America were being fueled by the role model effect. If Wences can do it, I can too. And we likened what was happening to the British runner Roger Bannister. Now, before Roger Bannister, running a sub-4-minute mile was universally considered impossible. But once Bannister broke through the mental barrier, running a 3-minute and 59.4-second mile, the mental barrier also flipped. Bannister's record lasted just 46 days, and today over 1,600 athletes have broken the Bannister barrier. And something similar happens. When one emerging market founder breaks that unicorn barrier, the mental idea flips. Suddenly, we can do it too. And by the way, it's not just geographic barriers that are being broken. These are all recent members of the Unicorn Club. So as we dug deeper, we realized that successful founders were doing more than just passively inspiring future generations. They were actively helping that next group of founders overcome the systematic barriers we spoke of earlier. So with our partners at Bain, we coined the multiplier effect. The multiplier effect is the process whereby successful entrepreneurs inspire, train, mentor, and invest in the next generation. And our hypothesis was that it's through the multiplier effect that tech ecosystems are jump-started. So we've surveyed thousands of countries across multiple markets to test how the multiplier effect holds up in practice. And I want to show you just our initial research that played out in Buenos Aires. Okay? So this is the Buenos Aires tech ecosystem in 1999. The outer circles are years, and the blue are the outer rings, and the blue circles or bubbles are tech startups. Now, the lines connecting the bubbles are the connections between and among founders. And you'll see here there's not much connectivity happening back in 1999. And by the way, in this 17-year period, only 17 tech firms were launched. Okay, now it's 2007. More lines means more mentorship, more inspiration, more training, more investment happening, but it's still not very robust. Now, 2014, dense lines means that inspiration, that training, that mentorship, that connection is happening, investment. This is the multiplier effect at play. But now you'll notice that some of the bubbles are bigger than others. The bigger the bubble, the more influence that founder has on the overall tech ecosystem. So to get a real sense of the multiplier effect, what I want to do is look at this 2014 map, removing just the 4 big bubbles, biggest bubbles, along with all of their connections. Without the big bubbles, without the multiplier effect, the ecosystem is barren. It's as if we've been transported back to 1999. So we've repeated our study in multiple markets. This is Istanbul and Lagos, and every study showed the same conclusion. It takes just 3 to 4 big bubbles, just 3 to 4, to jumpstart a tech ecosystem anywhere. And it's through this multiplier effect, as we said, that you build a unicorn breeding ground. Today, Latin America is home to 50 unicorns, almost all of whom trace their origins to one of the early big bubbles. But in 2017, we started noticing another pattern. This is when, from the time lapse, unicorns started really popping up in these markets. And we noticed that some of the big bubbles were becoming unicorn super breeders, meaning that their own alumni were starting the next wave of tech companies. And this pattern reminded me of something: the PayPal Mafia. Now, my good friend and board member, Reid Hoffman, tried to convince me to say PayPal networks. So I told him, own the Mafia, Reid. This is the PayPal Mafia's multiplier effect. These blue bubbles are just the companies founded or funded by the earliest PayPal employees. This is the Rappi Mafia. Colombia's first unicorn, Rappi, has now spawned over 100 companies founded by Rappi alumni throughout Latin America. In 2019, after Uber bought Careem, the Middle East ride-sharing company, for $3.1 billion, the Careem Mafia went into super breeder mode. Today, throughout the Middle East and North Africa, we see hundreds of companies founded by ex-Careem employees. Here in Europe, Juan de Antonio of Cabify, Spain's first unicorn, has become a big bubble and unicorn super breeder. We're also seeing the emergence of super app mafias in Southeast Asia and the early signs of fintech mafias in Africa. And here's what's really interesting. This combination of the talent of second-generation tech founders combined with access to local and global VC that was absent even 5 or 6 years ago is creating not just a new dynamic on these local tech ecosystems, but it's changing the global competitive landscape worldwide. Okay, so up until now, we've been talking about what successful founders do to actively multiply their impact to catalyze their local ecosystem. But the inverse also holds true. So we're going to look at now what not to do if you want to build a healthy unicorn breeding ground. Now, whenever I hear or see emerging market founders or funders pushing NDAs and non-competes or refusing to mentor someone or they don't socialize with their competitors, I ask them, would you rather model yourself after Silicon Valley or Route 128? And the answer is almost always, what's Route 128? Route 128 are the highways surrounding Boston suburbs where I grew up, which dominated tech. From the 1960s to 1980s, the early computer chip development was completely almost launched in Route 128. And during that period, Route 128 hired 3 times as many tech workers as in Silicon Valley. But the big bubbles on Route 128 did not employ the multiplier effect. Instead, they built vertically integrated companies which they tightly controlled through NDAs, non-competes, and by refusing to allow their employees to do peer networking. And the strategy backfired. The 1990s recession hit, the Massachusetts miracle came to an end, and today, few people even remember the impact of Route 128 on tech history. Now, by contrast, Silicon Valley's culture was forged by a group of engineers and scientists dubbed the Traitorous Eight when they defected from Shockley's secretive and hierarchical semiconductor lab. The Traitorous Eight not only seeded Silicon Valley's cross-pollinating culture, but they founded the first super breeder tech company, Fairchild Semiconductor. So this is the Fairchild Semiconductor Mafia, and what we're looking at here are just the direct spin-offs of Fairchild. They actively employed the multiplier effect. They inspired, they trained, they invested in, they mentored the next generation. And today, hundreds of Bay Area companies, sometimes referred to as the Fair Children, can trace their roots back to Fairchild Semiconductor. So the lesson of Route 128 is this: a unicorn that doesn't breed other unicorns is just an endangered species. And the lesson of Silicon Valley is that the more you breed unicorns today, the stronger your local ecosystem will be tomorrow. But the message really isn't about unicorns. It's really about turning these tech wastelands into areas where jobs and innovation and opportunities thrive. So what does this mean for the future of the Unicorn Club? Well, because you DLDers are a competitive lot, I'll end with this question. How big is your bubble? Thank you.